Hello and welcome to the Kitchen Garden Homestead. I'm Denise and today we're going to make nettle beer. I've been saying for quite some time that I would make nettle beer with you. Today's the day. I'm just giving everywhere a really good clean down before we start, and that's my first tip. Whenever you're doing any kind of homebrew, it's important to get everywhere as clean as possible. It isn't just about getting rid of the germs and bacteria that are living on cloths and around the sink. It's about trying to eradicate the natural yeast that can actually float around and be on all kinds of things, especially where I live in a very rural environment. We want to add a very specific yeast to our brew, and yeast actually fights, so this is to a large extent about eradicating any stray wild yeast that might be floating around or stuck on my surfaces. So now that I've given everywhere a good clean, it's time to clean the equipment. So we're going to make 5 litres of nettle beer, and in order to get that we're probably going to use about 6 litres of water. So you're going to need some kind of brewing bucket. Now I've got a dedicated brewing bucket here, which is really handy because it's got all the measurements down the side. It's got a nice airtight lid. Any bucket will do as long as you can sterilise it. Get the nettles plus 6 litres of water in it. So ideally a 10 litre bucket would be ideal. If you've got a lid that you can pop on it, all the better. But actually, for the first part of the fermentation, we'll be using a heavy towel over the top. So initially, I'm just scrubbing it out with liquid. I made elder wine last time in this. I took the mush up to the garden and then it ended up living in my potting shed for a few weeks, so it's actually got quite grubby. So when you've given it its initial clean with hot soapy water, it's time to sanitise it properly. So I'm using something called No Rinse Sanitize. It's really handy because it takes 15 minutes to completely sterilise the bucket. I tip it out afterwards and there's no need to rinse. If you haven't got this or something similar like Milton, you could use normal non-fragranced household bleach, but of course you're going to have to give it quite a rinse afterwards. Next up we're dealing with the nettles, and I strongly recommend gloves. They will sting. I'll give them a good initial rinse, strain off the water and rinse them again. Now the thing is about your nettles, you need a good bagful of nettles, and I have my trusty basket here. And you want to pick them from somewhere clean, not contaminated, not some building site somewhere. And the other important thing is you want them before they go to flower. 2 aspects to that. Firstly, they're bitter once they go to flower. It's like most plants that go to flower. Once they start to flower, the leaves will become more bitter tasting. There's also some crystals that form as the nettles go to flower. And although that's not poisonous or anything, it's not as easy for the body to flush it out. So for some people with delicate kidneys, it's not great. So we generally avoid eating nettles that have gone to flower. You're after the young, fresh tips. So if you come to a big patch of nettles and it's flowering, have a look around the base of the big clump and you're bound to find some new, young, tender shoots. So now they're rinsed, it's time to get them ready for the stovetop where we're going to boil them for 30 minutes. It's going to be quite a challenge to get them in my muslin pan, but I'll have a go. They do tend to kind of squish down as they're cooking, so it might be that I'll get half in and just gradually pop some more in as they're cooking down. You could always do it in batches if you don't have a pan big enough. keep your gloves on. So my muslin pan will hold about 4.5 litres. It's not going to be enough. Don't worry about the quantity of water that you have at this stage. Cover them with a reasonable amount of water, and we'll measure the water afterwards, and we'll top it up to the required amount with boiling water so that we get the 5 litres. I'm going to add plain old cold water. I actually had a change of heart. My main cooker is in the other room, and for the sake of setting up the camera again in another room, I thought I'd utilise my Instant Pot because I can put it on saute. The Nettles just about at a push fit into the Instant Pot tub, so I'll pop it in the Instant Pot on saute and get it boiling in there. Here you go, we've got an overhead view. I'm just adding the water to the inner pot. If you're using a stovetop pot, same principle. You want to get these just covered in water. Don't worry about squashing them down because it's like spinach, they're going to wilt down as they boil anyway. I've dared to take off my gloves to operate the Instant Pot. Put it on saute more 30 minutes and then I'll add 5 minutes for the heating up time. So while the nettles are busily boiling away, incidentally, I think it's been more of a faff doing it in the Instant Pot. I do recommend you do it on a stovetop. We need 1 lemon and 1 orange. I'm all out of orange. But as you know, I have a well-stocked pantry and I've got some dehydrated orange. So I'm going to put a small handful of dehydrated orange. So we need the juice of a lemon and the juice of an orange. I shall rehydrate the orange in a little bit of water, and that will account for the juice. You can get creative, you know. I think at the very least you need the 1 lemon. You also need the zest. So I shall attempt to get the zest without wrapping my knuckles. Better way to get the zest off on all these beers, leave it in the comments please. Ow. Yeah, of course I grated my thumb. It's going to hurt when I get lemon juice in it. Let's have a look at those nettles. So those are simmering away nicely in the Instant Pot. Incidentally, that turned out to be a real faff. I do not recommend using your Instant Pot for this job. First of all, it boiled over. Then I got the awful hot signal, so it turned itself off. Was worried it was going to blow up. Finally, it started again. I think it'd probably be done by now had I just done it the traditional way on top of the stove. So as you can see, you want to ideally like a low rolling boil. That's barely a simmer, but it will be fine. So next up, we need 1.5 pounds of sugar. Here you can see 1.5 pounds ready. We need 1 ounce of cream of tartar, so let's get that weighed out. I don't think I've used this since the last time I made Nettle Beer. So there we have 1 ounce cream of tartar, 5 grams of active dried yeast, ideally ale or beer yeast. I'm going to use wine because that's what I have. Last time I used bread yeast and it worked fine, but that's not usually recommended. So we've got our sugar, cream of tartar, active dry yeast, orange substitute, and the juice and zest of 1 lemon. So in the meantime, the bucket that I'm sanitising is probably getting on towards an hour now. That's an hour at real time. Obviously I'm bobbing you along a little bit to avoid the boring bits. Empty out the sanitiser. That's squeaky clean now. Just pop the lid on. Keep it that way. Just prepped my standing orange, so I've got some boiling water. This is my dehydrated orange peel. I've just got it soaking in there. It's very orangey, so that's going to stand in for my one orange. So now it's time to strain the nettles. We're going to discard the leaves. All we want is the lovely juice. You see the colour of that? It's all the goodness from the nettles has gone into that water. Here's my twisty tongs. Give that a good squash down. We want all of that goodness out of the nettle. We've got 2.5 litres of nettle water in here, and that's going to go into the brewing bucket. And then I shall top that up to 5 litres with boiling hot water. So at this point, we're back to the brewing bucket. Pop the lid on to keep it nice and clean while I was faffing around. Put that over there. So 2.5 litres of that lovely liquid is going to go into the brewing bucket. The sterilised brewing bucket. So we're here, handily, it tells me where the 5 litre mark is. So I'm just going to add another 2.5 litres of boiling hot water to this. In the meantime, I'll add the substitute orange, the lemon juice, and the lemon zest. Remember, I've still got to add the ginger root in, so add a 2-inch piece, get it nice and bruised and chuck it in. But that really is optional. The orange is optional. The only necessity is the lemon juice, so the juice of 1 lemon and the lemon zest. That's part of what will help to sanitise the liquid and keep it fresh for longer. So at this stage, our cream of tartar goes in, and I'll put a reminder on screen of all the measurements as I pop them in. So in goes the cream of tartar. At this point, you want to give it a good stir. So getting back to those optional ingredients, the orange is going to complement the flavour of the nettles. The ginger is going to do the same. And if you think about it, those are zesty, tangy flavours. I mean, you can get experimental with dried herbs in here, but you've got to think about what's going to complement the taste of the beer. I think a little bit of ginger would be great. If you don't have fresh ginger, you could put a tablespoon of dried ginger in here, or as I said, leave it out completely. So at this point, I'm going to go and boil up another 2.5 litres of water and add that to the bucket. Final magic ingredients, the sugar. And it's the yeast that acts on the sugar to turn this into alcohol. So when it pops, give it a good stir around. It's very hot, so that sugar's going to melt, and of course I'm going to be adding some hot liquid, some more hot liquid to this, which will help that melt. So while I was boiling up the water, the ginger has arrived, so I'll mush that up and we'll chuck that in. Chop it up a little bit and give it a bit of a pound. We've got 2.5 litres of the strained juices from the nettle. We've added the lemon, the cream of tartar, the orange, and here's the rest of the water. Just taking it above the 5 litre mark with a bit of evaporation, straining off a few bits that are in there. That's probably going to be close to the 5 litres that we're aiming for. So we'll give it one final stir. All the sugar's dissolved. We've got the ginger, cream of tartar, lemon and orange. The final ingredient to go in is the yeast, but this is far too hot for the yeast to go in at the moment. At this temperature, it'll just kill the yeast. We need it to be about 21 degrees C. It's currently reading 56 degrees. Far too hot. This wants to be 21 degrees. If you don't have a digital thermometer, think quite a bit cooler than you'd bath a baby in. That's when we pitch the yeast. And by pitching the yeast, I literally mean sprinkling it on top. So our next step is to get a towel. I find an old but clean bath towel is just the right weight. Forms a nice seal around the bucket, but enough to keep any pests out. So I'll bring you back later. I'm probably going to give it 2 or 3 hours, check the temperature again, and then pitch the yeast. Well, it's some time later. I've eaten my tea, just about to fall asleep. We're now ready to pitch the yeast. So pitching the yeast just literally means sprinkling it in. You sprinkle the yeast in. Cover it back over with its towel, and I'll leave that now. I'm going to give it a stir around before bedtime, and in the morning I'll check it. Well, good morning, it's the next day. So we pitched the yeast last night and it's been sat in the bucket. I checked it just before bed and it had formed a little circle of bubbles. What next? This needs a full 24 hours with the towel over the top. And as I said, that's because the yeast actually benefits from the oxygen as well as the sugar. But after 24 hours, it's probably best if we seal the top to stop any contaminants getting in. So let's pretend it's 24 hours later. I shall remove the towel . And seal the brew lid. The brewing bucket lid has what we call an airlock. As the yeast works away eating up the sugar, it produces gases. The headspace, which is the gap between the liquid and the top of the lid, will fill up with those gases, and eventually they'll have to be released through the little hole and up into the airlock. It's called an airlock because the water in here will prevent air coming down through and contaminating the brew, but the gases inside the bucket have enough pressure to work their way up, round, bubbling through the water and up to here. This isn't airtight and they can work their way back up. So on it will go. Once it's had a towel over the top for 24 hours, we'll completely seal it down. This has got a massive amount of headspace, so all of this essentially has to fill up with the gases before this airlock is activated and I visually see the activity. I'm fine with that because I've got quite a bit of experience and I'm used to working with it. However, it might be an idea at this stage to transfer the liquid and anything floating in it into a smaller vessel with a smaller amount of headspace. This in turn will give much more of an indication in the airlock of how much activity is in there. We want to see really rapid activity after the 24 hours and for the first few days, and we ideally want to see that slowing down to activity that you see maybe once every couple of minutes, and it's at that point that it's ready to bottle. So this is a different style of airlock to the previous one that I showed you. I actually really like this. It's two-piece, so fits into the top of there, and you pour the sterile water into here about halfway up, and then secure the second piece onto the top, and just like the other one, the gas will build up in the headspace, push up through the stem, meet the water and create a bubble. I'll upload a bottling video in 6 to 10 days time when this is actually ready to bottle. But in the meantime, I'm going to talk you through what happens next. So let's imagine that these two demijohns, currently with rosé and a red wine in, are our Nettle Beer. Take a look at this darker red wine. Can you see the amount of sediment at the bottom? We call that lees, and that's basically all of the dead yeast and particles sinking to the bottom of the demijohn. And regardless of whether or not we're using a demijohn or leaving it in the brewing bucket, at bottling stage, we need to separate the sediment from the clear liquid. I've got a Kilner preserving funnel, and it's got a handy little filter in the middle. It's really good for bottling. And here I've got a wine siphon, and it comes with a really handy little filter on the bottom, which it won't take out tiny particles, but anything big and chunky is going to get captured within that filter before it sucks up through the tube to this end. So this works on a vacuum, squeezing, pulling the fluid up through the tubing to eventually fill up this part. And as you squeeze, the beer or wine comes out into the bottle. So I'm probably going to use this, but as a bit of extra filtration, I'm going to use this cheesecloth. So I'll ladle the Nettle Beer into here. It'll go through the cheesecloth, through the metal filter, out the other end, into my bottle of choice. At this point, I want to put out a huge warning. I will be using a plastic bottle, and I very, very strongly recommend that you use a plastic bottle. Bottle bombs are a real thing. I know I've had that happen, and I actually had it happen when I made Nettle Beer last. When we bottle this, it's going to still be active. It's not going to be as active as it will be tomorrow, but in 6 to 10 days time, even if the airlock is showing no sign of activity, there is still sugar in here, there is still yeast, and it will carry on producing gases. This is designed to hold ale or beer. It's quite strong. In comparison to this cheap, very thin plastic bottle that has been produced to hold water. When I had my bottle bomb, I'd reused a fizzy pop bottle container, but it was one of the supermarket owned brands and I think it was quite cheap. So the idea is we'll filter the Nettle beer into the bottle. We'll take it up to about 1.5 inches of headspace and we'll secure the lid tight. Hopefully there is a tiny bit of activity going on and this will go from being bendable to taut. What we have to do is over the first few days is keep coming in every day and checking to see how taut this bottle has become. If it feels really taut and there's no way at all we can squash it, we know that we've got a huge build-up of pressure in there. And what we'll want to do is just open it a tiny bit and let out some of that pressure until you can just, give a little bit. You've released enough of the fizz so that this doesn't turn into a bottle bomb. On the occasion of my bottle bomb, I had diligently burped the bottles. However, I'd had a busy day, busy couple of days, and I'd forgot completely. I heard the explosion from a couple of rooms away, came rushing in and saw that the bottle had completely split as it had exploded. There was Nettle beer absolutely everywhere. I mean, my goodness, what a mess to clean up. But can you imagine if that had been? So please, please, please don't use glass. Don't be tempted to use glass. It's incredibly dangerous. And in fact, my recommendation, even if you're using plastic, is to store these in a cardboard box so that if you have any explosions, it's easier to clean up the mess. But if you diligently burp every day, you'll be fine. And then after 5 days of burping them and keeping an eye on them, they can go into the fridge. And once they're in the fridge, it's too cold for that yeast to be active and you should be fine. Well, I hope you enjoyed my walkthrough of how to make stinging nettle beer. Any questions at all, let me know. I'll be posting some shorts on the progress. I'll create a playlist. I'll pop everything in there so you can follow the progress. And in 6 to 10 days time, I'll do a video on the actual bottling process. As I mentioned, any questions at all, pop them in the comments and I'll promptly get back to you. Thanks for watching. Bye.